The sound wasn't loud, but in the hushed, sterile luxury of the private jet terminal, it was a thunderclap. The sharp crack of a hand striking a cheek echoed off the polished marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows. On one side stood Heather, a flight attendant in a perfectly crisp uniform, her face a mask of defiant rage. On the other, a black woman in dusty cargo pants and a faded t-shirt, her expression one of stunned disbelief, a red handprint already blooming on her skin. Heather had just committed the biggest mistake of her life, because what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly comprehend, was that the woman she had just assaulted wasn't a lost tourist or a misplaced member of the cleaning crew. She was Serafina Hayes, the reclusive billionaire who didn't just charter the jet. She owned the entire fleet. The air at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey always smelled of two things, money and power. It was a scent composed of atomized jet fuel, expensive leather, and the quiet, confident hum of engines that could cross continents before sunset. It was a world of effortless transitions, where the global elite stepped from black cars onto red carpets that led directly to the air stairs of their private chariots. Inside the exclusive FBO fixed-base operator lounge, managed by Stratos Jet Charter, Heather Vance felt she was exactly where she belonged. At 28, she had meticulously crafted a life that looked, at least from the outside, like a page from a luxury magazine. Her Instagram was a curated gallery of sunsets from 40,000 feet, champagne flutes clinking over exotic landscapes, and selfies in the plush cabins of Gulfstream G650s. She was a flight attendant, but in her mind, she was a gatekeeper to this world, a custodian of its rarefied air. Today's flight was a deadhead leg positioning the jet for a high-profile client in Los Angeles. But even for an empty flight, standards were standards. Her uniform was immaculate, a deep navy blue blazer with a silk scarf tied just so at her neck. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a chignon, so tight it felt like a minor facelift. Every detail was designed to project an aura of effortless class, an aura she believed she had earned. That's when she saw her. The woman was standing near the large window overlooking the tarmac, her back to the lounge. But even from behind, she was an offense to Heather's sensibilities. She was wearing worn olive-drab cargo pants, tucked into scuffed steel-toed work boots caked with dried mud. A simple charcoal grey t-shirt stretched across her shoulders, and her hair was pulled back in a practical thick braid that fell down her back. She didn't belong. Heather's lips tightened into a thin, disapproving line. The lounge was supposed to be a sanctuary, exclusively for Stratos Jet clients and their guests. This woman looked like she'd wandered in from a construction site. Probably lost looking for the commercial terminal, Heather thought with a sneer. She glided across the Italian marble, her heels clicking with purpose. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with forced saccharine politeness. "Can I help you?" The woman turned. She was black, perhaps in her late 30s, with intelligent, perceptive eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. There was a smudge of dirt on her cheek, and her hands, though clean, had the look of someone who worked with them. She offered a small, tired smile. "I'm just waiting for my flight," she said, her voice calm and even, with a warmth that contrasted sharply with Heather's icy tone. Heather's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched. "Your flight?" "This is the Stratos Jet private terminal. The commercial terminals are on the other side of the airport." She said commercial, as if it were a dirty word. "I'm in the right place," the woman replied. Her smile not wavering, though her eyes narrowed slightly. This was an affront. Heather felt a flush of irritation. This woman was arguing with her. In her lounge. "Ma'am, I think you're mistaken. Access to this facility is restricted. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "There's no mistake," the woman said, her voice losing a bit of its warmth, replaced by a note of firmness. "I'm waiting for the flight crew for the 9 a.m. departure to LAX." Heather almost laughed. The 9 a.m. to LAX was her flight. It was the positioning flight for the jet that would later carry the tech mogul Alistair Finch. "That's our jet. It's a private charter. Perhaps you're with the catering service or ground crew," she asked, her tone implying that even those roles were a stretch. "No," the woman said, simply turning back to the window. "I'm the passenger." The sheer audacity of the lie stunned Heather. She felt her professional veneer crack. All the little frustrations of her day, the traffic on the way to work, the condescending text from her fiancé Mark, asking if she was playing make-believe with the rich people again, coalesced into a single point of focused anger. This woman with her muddy boots and dirty face was mocking her. She was claiming a place in a world where she clearly, obviously, did not fit. "That's impossible!" Heather snapped, her voice sharp and loud now. The two other staff members in the lounge, a receptionist and a baggage handler, looked over. "I am the lead flight attendant for that aircraft, and you are not on the manifest. There are no passengers on this flight. Now, I'm not going to ask you again. Please leave before I call security." The woman turned fully to face Heather. The smile was completely gone now, replaced by an expression of profound disappointment and weariness. "And I'm telling you, I am supposed to be on that plane. My name is Serafina Hayes." Heather stared blankly. The name meant nothing to her. It wasn't Alistair Finch. It wasn't some celebrity she'd recognize. It was just a name attached to a lie. "I don't care if your name is the Queen of England," Heather seethed, stepping closer, invading the woman's personal space. "You are not getting on my jet looking like that, and you are not staying in this lounge. You are a trespasser and a liar." Serafina Hayes stood her ground. Her calm demeanor seemed to infuriate Heather even more. "My appearance," Serafina said, her voice dangerously quiet, "is the result of a 12-hour shift at my company's geothermal test site in upstate New York. I haven't had time to change. It has no bearing on my right to be here. Your hostility, however, is becoming a serious problem." "My hostility?" Heather let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You waltz in here filthy and try to con your way onto a multi-million-dollar aircraft, and I'm the one with the problem. You people are always looking for a handout, always trying to get something for nothing." The slur hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. Serafina's eyes, once just weary, now flashed with a cold fire. "You people," she repeated, her voice dropping to a whisper. That was it. That was the breaking point. For Heather, this was no longer about procedure or security. It was about defending her territory, her manufactured status from someone she deemed unworthy. Her training, her professionalism, her common sense, all of it evaporated in a hot flash of prejudice and fury. "Get out!" Heather shrieked, her voice cracking. "Get out now!" "You need to lower your voice," Serafina commanded, her tone now one of undisguised authority. "And you need to learn some respect." The command, the sheer audacity of this woman, telling her what to do, sent Heather over the edge. In a single reflexive motion, fueled by a toxic cocktail of insecurity and rage, she swung her arm. Crack! The sound was sharp, visceral. Heather's open palm connected squarely with Serafina Hayes's cheek. For a moment, there was absolute silence. The receptionist gasped. The baggage handler froze his jaw slack. Heather stood panting, her hand tingling, staring at the bright red handprint she'd left on the black woman's face. In that deafening silence, the main door to the lounge slid open with a soft hiss. In walked two men in crisp pilot uniforms and a well-dressed man in a suit holding a tablet. The lead pilot, a distinguished man in his 50s with silvering temples, stopped short, his eyes widening at the scene. "What in God's name is going on here?" Captain Marcus Thorne demanded. The man in the suit, Liam Peterson, dropped his tablet onto a nearby chair. His eyes, however, weren't on the pilot or the flight attendant. They were locked on the red mark on Serafina Hayes's face. His normally placid professional expression morphed into one of icy, controlled fury. He took 3 quick strides forward, bypassing Heather as if she were a piece of furniture, and stood before Serafina. His voice was low, but it carried across the silent room with perfect clarity. "Sarah," he said, his voice tight with concern. "Are you all right? What happened?" Serafina finally broke her stunned silence. She touched her cheek gently, her eyes still locked on Heather. She didn't look angry. She looked resolved. "It seems, Liam," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "that we have a problem with the staff." Heather stared, bewildered. The man in the suit knew this woman. He called her Sarah. Liam then turned his gaze on Heather. His eyes were like chips of blue ice. "You," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "What is your name?" Heather, still running on adrenaline and indignation, lifted her chin defiantly. "I am Heather Vance, the lead flight attendant, and this woman was trespassing. I asked her to leave, and she refused. She became aggressive." Liam listened without blinking. When she finished, a terrifyingly calm smile touched his lips. He looked at Captain Thorne. "Captain, please have your co-pilot begin the pre-flight checklist. We won't be needing Ms. Vance today, or ever again." He then turned back to Heather. "Heather Vance," he said, as if memorizing it. "You work for Stratus Jet Charter, which is contracted by my employer for fleet management and staffing." He paused, letting the words sink in. "My employer is Serafina Hayes." He gestured toward the woman with the red mark on her face. "This is Serafina Hayes." Heather's defiant expression began to crumble, replaced by a wave of confusion. "Serafina Hayes? Who is that?" Liam looked at her with something akin to pity. "Do you see the tail number on that Gulfstream out there?" he asked, pointing to the sleek jet parked just outside the window. "N44AG. The AG stands for Auragen, as in Auragen Technologies." A cold dread, far more chilling than the winter air outside, began to seep into Heather's bones. Auragen Technologies. She knew the name. Everyone knew the name. It was one of the most valuable renewable energy companies on the planet, famous for its revolutionary carbon capture systems. It was founded by a famously reclusive genius CEO. A CEO who never appeared in public, whose picture wasn't plastered over magazines. A CEO named Serafina Hayes. Heather's world tilted on its axis. Her eyes darted from Liam's cold face to the woman she had just slapped. The muddy boots, the work pants, the smudge of dirt. It wasn't the look of a trespasser. It was the look of someone who had just come from the field, her field. She had not slapped a vagrant. She had not assaulted a con artist. She had just slapped the billionaire who owned the very plane she stood on, the company that chartered it, and for all intents and purposes, her entire career. The thunderclap she had created moments ago was, she realized with sickening certainty, the sound of her own life imploding. The silence that followed Liam's revelation was heavier than gravity. Heather felt it pressing down on her, stealing the air from her lungs. Her mind raced, trying to build a dam against the tidal wave of reality. But it was useless. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying speed. Auragen Technologies. The client name on the internal briefing always listed as a corporate entity, never a person. The extreme privacy protocols. The standing order that the N-44AG jet was to be ready at a moment's notice, no questions asked. The astronomical size of the Stratos jet contract with Auragen, a subject of hushed awe among the staff. It was the foundation of the charter company's recent expansion. She stared at Serafina Hayes, truly seeing her for the first time. The quiet confidence wasn't arrogance, it was authority. The weary eyes weren't those of a vagrant, but of a leader who had, as she'd said, just finished a 12-hour shift, innovating the technology that was changing the world. Captain Thorne, a man with 25 years of flying experience and a sixth sense for trouble, understood the magnitude of the disaster instantly. He had seen CEOs, royalty, and volatile celebrities. But this was different. This wasn't a client throwing a tantrum. This was a quiet, dignified woman who had been physically assaulted by his crew member. He stepped forward, his face a grim mask of professionalism. "Ms. Hayes," he said, his voice resonating with sincerity. "On behalf of the flight crew, I am profoundly sorry. This is inexcusable." He shot a look at Heather that could have melted steel. "Miss Vance, you will come with me. Now." But Liam held up a hand, stopping him. "One moment, Captain. I need to document this." He retrieved his tablet and tapped the screen, activating the camera. He spoke in a clear, measured tone. "For the record, it is 9:07 a.m., November 12th. We are in the Stratusjet FBO at Teterboro. I am Liam Peterson, Chief of Staff, for Serafina Hayes. A moment ago I walked in to find that Stratusjet flight attendant Heather Vance had physically assaulted Miss Hayes." He angled the tablet to clearly capture the red handprint on Serafina's cheek. The image on the screen was damning, clinical, indisputable. Heather began to hyperventilate. "No, it wasn't. I thought..." The excuses died in her throat, tasting like ash. What could she possibly say? "I thought she was poor. I thought she didn't belong. I assaulted her because of my own pathetic prejudices." Serafina finally spoke, her voice steady now, imbued with a chilling calm. "Liam, cancel the flight. I'm not going to Los Angeles today." She looked at Captain Thorne. "Captain, my apologies. This is not your fault. You and your co-pilot are dismissed." "Ms. Hayes, if there's anything..." he started. "You've done nothing wrong, Captain." She interrupted gently, but with an air of finality. "Go home to your family. Liam will be in touch." The captain, recognizing a command when he heard one, simply nodded. He gave Heather one last look of utter contempt before turning and leaving the lounge, his co-pilot trailing silently behind him. Now it was just Serafina, Liam, and Heather in the vast, silent room, along with the two shell-shocked airport employees who were trying to make themselves invisible. "Heather Vance," Serafina said, saying the name as if tasting it for the first time. She walked slowly toward the trembling flight attendant. Heather flinched and took a step back, a pathetic, reflexive action that underscored the absurdity of the situation. "I founded my first company with a $5,000 loan from my grandmother," Serafina said, her voice a low murmur. "I slept on the floor of my office for 2 years. I've been covered in grease fixing a faulty turbine in the middle of a desert, and I've been covered in mud checking the foundations of a new plant. My appearance, Ms. Vance, is a testament to my work. The work that pays for that uniform on your back, the marble under your feet, and the wings of the jet you so proudly claim as your own." She stopped directly in front of Heather. "I have been in boardrooms with the most powerful men in the world who have tried to dismiss me, patronize me, and underestimate me, but not one of them in all my years has ever dared to lay a hand on me." Heather started to sob, the carefully constructed facade of her life crumbling into dust. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Please, I'll do anything. I need this job." "You don't need this job," Serafina corrected her, her voice cutting. "You need the idea of this job, the glamour, the proximity to wealth. You saw me and you didn't see a person. You saw a stain on your perfect picture. Your apology is not for what you did, but for who you did it to, and that Ms. Vance makes it worthless." Liam stepped forward. "Security is on its way to escort you from the premises. You are to hand over your company ID and all airport access cards. A representative from StratusJet HR will be in contact with you regarding the termination of your employment, effective immediately." "Termination?" Heather choked out the word. "But it was a mistake." "Assaulting a client is not a mistake," Liam said coldly. "It is a choice with consequences." The doors slid open again. This time, 2 uniformed airport security officers entered. They looked from Liam to Heather, awaiting instructions. "This woman is being removed from the property," Liam stated. "She is no longer an employee of any company associated with this terminal." As the officers moved towards her, Heather made one last desperate appeal, her eyes wild with panic. She looked at Serafina, the billionaire she had slapped. "Please, Ms. Hayes, don't do this. I have a fiancé. My life, it's all I have." Serafina looked at her, and for the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed her face. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pity. It was a profound academic curiosity. "Your life," Serafina mused softly. "You built a life on a foundation of judging others by the most superficial of standards. Today that foundation cracked. What happens next is entirely up to you." With a final dismissive nod, Serafina turned her back on Heather and walked towards the window, looking out at her jet. Her jet, which sat silent and waiting, a testament to a power Heather could not even comprehend. As the security guards gently but firmly took her arms, guiding her out of the lounge and away from the life she had so desperately coveted, Heather Vance knew one thing with a certainty that chilled her to the marrow. This was only the beginning of her fall. The slap was the act, but the karma, the real hard, life-altering karma, was just getting started. The news of the incident at Teterboro did not travel through official channels. It moved faster. It shot through the closed-circuit communication network of the ultra-wealthy's support staff, a web of pilots, executive assistants, and charter company dispatchers. Before Captain Thorne had even cleared the airport perimeter, the story was already a whispered legend. "Did you hear? A StratusJet FA slapped a passenger." Not just a passenger. It was Serafina Hayes herself. No way. The Auragen woman, I heard she decked her. At the gleaming corporate headquarters of StratusJet Charter in White Plains, New York. CEO Robert Sterling was in the middle of a quarterly earnings call, boasting about their robust growth and premier client relationships. He had just named their flagship Auragen Technologies account as a cornerstone of their success. His personal phone, set to vibrate on the polished mahogany of the boardroom table, began to buzz incessantly. He ignored it. Then his assistant, a young woman named Chloe, with an uncanny ability to look panicked and professional, at the same time slipped into the room and slid a note in front of him. The note contained only 5 words. Call me. Urgent. Hayes incident. Robert Sterling felt a drop of ice water slide down his spine. He abruptly ended his sentence, mumbled an apology to the investors on the line, and put the call on mute. "What is it?" he hissed at Chloe. "There was an altercation at the Teterboro FBO," she whispered, her face pale. "With Miss Hayes, one of our flight attendants. Heather Vance was involved." "Involved how?" he demanded, already dreading the answer. Sir, she's alleged to have struck Miss Hayes." Robert Sterling felt the blood drain from his face. For a moment he thought he was going to be physically ill. The Origen account wasn't just a cornerstone, it was the entire goddamn foundation. They managed a fleet of 5 long-range jets for the tech giant, a contract worth north of $50 million a year in management fees alone, not to mention the halo effect it gave their brand. Serafina Hayes was their unicorn client, massively wealthy, famously private and zero drama. Until now. He spent the next hour in a vortex of damage control. He got the full unvarnished story from a grim-faced Captain Thorne, who omitted no detail from Heather's condescending tone to the racial slur. He then placed a call to Liam Peterson. It was the most excruciating phone call of his life. Liam was polite. Terribly, terrifyingly polite. He didn't yell. He didn't make threats. He simply stated facts. "Mr. Sterling." Liam began, his voice as calm as a frozen lake. "At approximately 9:07 a.m., your employee, Heather Vance, committed an act of unprovoked battery against my employer, Miss Serafina Hayes. The incident was witnessed by multiple parties. It was a culmination of a pattern of unprofessional and discriminatory behavior." "Liam, Mr. Peterson." "I am beyond horrified," Robert stammered. "Ms. Vance has been terminated, of course. Effective immediately. We will do anything to make this right." "I'm glad to hear Ms. Vance has been terminated," Liam said, his tone unchanging. "That is a necessary but wholly insufficient first step. We have cancelled all scheduled flights for the next 72 hours, while Ms. Hayes considers her options. You can expect to hear from our legal counsel shortly. Have a good day, Mr. Sterling." The line went dead. Legal counsel. The 2 words every CEO fears most. Sterling slammed his fist on the table. He roared for his head of HR and for Heather Vance's complete file. It landed on his desk 10 minutes later. As he flipped through it, his rage turned to cold fear. Heather Vance was on paper a model employee. Glowing reviews, perfect attendance. But tucked inside were 2 minor complaints from the last year, both flagged by a junior HR rep, but dismissed by Heather's direct supervisor. One from a catering team leader who described her as arrogant and dismissive. Another from a South Asian client's assistant, who noted that Ms. Vance seemed uncomfortable and curt with his principal. They were small cracks, easily plastered over at the time. Now they looked like warning signs for a fault line that had just caused a magnitude 10 earthquake. When Heather arrived at the headquarters, escorted by HR, she looked like a ghost. Her perfect chignon had come loose strands of blonde hair, clinging to her tear-streaked face. Her uniform, once a symbol of pride, now looked like a costume for a tragedy. She was ushered into Robert Sterling's office. He didn't ask her to sit. He stood behind his massive desk, the picture of corporate fury. "Explain yourself," he commanded, his voice low and dangerous. Heather began to weave a pathetic, desperate narrative. Mr. Sterling. She came out of nowhere. She was dressed like a vagrant. She refused to identify herself. She got aggressive. I felt threatened. Sterling held up a hand, silencing her. Stop. Just stop lying. I spoke to Captain Thorne. I know you questioned her. I know you insulted her. I know you used a racial slur. And I know you hit her. He leaned forward, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of his desk. Do you have any idea what you've done? You didn't just assault a passenger, you moron. You assaulted the woman who single-handedly funds a third of our company's valuation. Our stock will dip on rumors of this. Our reputation, which we spent 20 years building, is now radioactive. I'm sorry, she wailed, the tears flowing freely now. It was a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to stock their preferred brand of sparkling water. Heather. Sterling roared, his control finally snapping. Assaulting a black woman because you decided she didn't look rich enough for your liking is not a mistake. It's a combination of stupidity and bigotry so profound it's almost impressive. He gestured to the HR director standing by the door. Her termination is processed. Yes, Mr. Sterling. Severance. Per company policy for termination with cause, there is none. Good, Sterling spat. He looked back at Heather. Your airport access has been revoked. You are blacklisted from this company, and I will personally see to it that every other reputable charter company in North America hears about what you did today. You are not just fart. You are finished. The fantasy is over. Now get out of my office. Get out of my building. Defeated and empty. Heather was escorted out of the building. She had walked in that morning as Heather Vance, elite flight attendant. She walked out as just Heather, the unemployed woman who had slapped a billionaire. She stood on the curb, the cold November wind whipping at her now disgraced uniform, and pulled out her phone to call her fiancé Mark. She would have to spin this frame herself as the victim. It was the only play she had left. Mark Gilbert was a man who understood the power of a brand. As a marketing manager for a flashy fintech startup, he lived and breathed narratives. His job was to craft stories that made people feel successful, aspirational, and smart for choosing his company's product. His own life was his most important marketing campaign, and Heather Vance was his star spokeswoman. He wasn't just in love with her. He was in love with the reflection of himself he saw in her glamorous life. The life of a woman who summers in the sky, as he'd boasted to a colleague just last week over craft beers. Her stories of Dubai, Monaco, and the Swiss Alps became his stories. Her proximity to power made him feel powerful. When his phone rang and Heather's name flashed on the screen, he answered with a familiar, easy smile. Hey, babe. Just touching down from paradise. The sound that met him was not the cheerful, confident voice he expected, but a choked, hysterical sob. Mark, she cried, her voice cracking. Something terrible happened. He sat bolt upright in his ergonomic office chair, his marketing brain instantly switching to crisis mode. He listened intently as she wove her frantic, carefully edited narrative. It was a story of victimization, a David and Goliath tale where she was the noble working-class hero. This woman, she came out of nowhere, Mark, dressed like she was homeless, covered in filth, Heather explained between gasps. She was trying to get onto the jet, and I had to stop her. She got so aggressive right in my face, screaming. I felt threatened, truly threatened. I pushed her away just to get some space, and she fell. Now, because she's some big-shot client's friend, they're taking her side. They fired me. Mark, they just threw me away. In her version, the slap became a push. The racial slur was erased entirely. Serafina, the calm, self-possessed billionaire, was transformed into an unhinged aggressor. Mark felt a surge of white-hot rage on her behalf. "What, they fired you for defending yourself?" he seethed, pacing his small office. "That's insane. It's disgusting, babe. They're choosing some rich jerk over their loyal employee. This is a lawsuit waiting to happen. Don't worry. We'll fight this. We'll get the best wrongful termination lawyer in New York. We'll own them." His support was a lifeline, the first solid thing she'd been able to grab onto all day. He picked her up from the train station that evening. She looked utterly broken, her makeup smeared, her perfect uniform rumpled. The sight of her vulnerability reinforced his narrative. She was the victim. He was the protector. He took her back to their expensive apartment, the one with the view that was mostly another brick building, but whose address sounded impressive, and wrapped her in a soft, cream-colored cashmere blanket he'd bought her for Christmas. For 2 days, their apartment became a fortress of shared indignation. They ordered expensive takeout, drank wine, and railed against the injustices of the world, the entitlement of the rich, the spinelessness of corporations. Heather would drift between bouts of listless channel surfing and sudden racking sobs. Mark would dutifully pause his work-from-home tasks to hold her murmuring reassurances. He spent hours on his laptop researching top employment law firms, feeling righteous and powerful. He was fighting for his woman, for justice. He was living in the story she had created. But late on the second night, the fortress began to show cracks. Heather had finally cried herself to sleep on the sofa, the cashmere blanket pulled up to her chin. The apartment was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Mark sat at the kitchen island, nursing a glass of whiskey, unable to settle. A tiny, insidious thought, like a grain of sand in an engine, kept grinding in his mind. As a marketing professional, he knew that a brand as polished as Stratos Jet wouldn't fire a star employee over a simple misunderstanding, no matter how rich the client. There had to be more to it. Driven by this nagging professional curiosity, he decided to do some digging. He wouldn't betray Heather's trust, of course. He was just gathering intelligence for their impending legal battle. He started by searching for news on Stratos Jet, finding nothing. Then he narrowed his search to more niche sources, finally landing on a members-only forum he'd heard pilots talk about, propilotworld.com. The site's design was dated a relic of the early 2000s, all text and hyperlinks, filled with arcane acronyms and inside jokes. He scrolled through threads about FAA regulations and turbulence reports, until a title caught his eye, causing his stomach to clench with a sudden, inexplicable dread. Thread Stratusjet FA. Fired for hitting client at Teb. His heart began to pound. Tebby. Teterboro. He clicked the link. The first post laid out the basic rumor. As he scrolled, the details grew sharper, more specific and terrifyingly different from the story he'd been told. User Captain Chaos. It's the real deal. My buddy is with NetJets. He got it from the FBO manager. The FA was Heather Vance. The passenger. Get this. It was Serafina Hayes. Mark froze. Heather Vance. His Heather. The name of the passenger meant nothing to him. He kept reading, his hands growing clammy. User Rotorhead22. Hayes of Auragen. Nofing Way. The one who never shows her face. I thought she was a myth. That FA is toast. Burnt toast. User Flygirl LX. Vance worked with her for years and didn't recognize her. Ouch. That's a career-ending move. My company has a standing do not hire on her already. Word is, she dropped a racial slur before she hit her. Total lack of professionalism. The words racial slur seemed to leap off the screen. It was an ugly, jarring detail that had been conspicuously absent from Heather's tearful account. A new post appeared at the bottom of the thread from a user with a ground crew tag. User Tarmac Joe, I was there, saw the whole thing. The passenger was calm. The F.A. Vance was the one screaming, called the woman "you people," then clocked her. It wasn't a push, it was a full-on slap. The passenger's assistant and the pilots walked in right after. You could have heard a pin drop. Mark felt the air leave his body in a rush, a cold wave of nausea washing over him. This wasn't a conflicting report. It was a completely different story, told with the chilling consistency of truth. He fumbled to open a new browser tab, his fingers shaking as he typed Serafina Hayes into the search bar. The first result was a Forbes profile. No picture, just a silhouette. The text, however, was paralyzing. Serafina Hayes, net worth, 2 billion, source, Aura, Gen Technologies founder, CEO. He read on his world, tilting on its axis. The article described her as intensely private, a once-in-a-generation genius who had revolutionized the energy sector. And then he saw the sentence that made it all click into place. Ms. Hayes remains famously hands-on, often making unannounced visits to her company's remote geothermal and carbon capture sites, frequently arriving covered in the dust and mud of her work, dressed like she was homeless, covered in filth. Heather's words echoed in his head, no longer a description of a vagrant, but of a billionaire at work. The woman Heather had slapped wasn't a client's friend. She was the client. She was the silent, massive power behind the entire Stratus Jet contract, the foundation of the glamour Heather wore like a second skin. The disgust rose in his throat, hot and bitter. It wasn't just that she had lied. It was the nature of the lie. She had inverted reality painting a powerful self-made black woman as an aggressive pauper to cover up her own shocking act of prejudice and violence. The cashmere blanket on the couch suddenly looked obscene. His righteous anger felt foolish, pathetic. He had been a pawn in her squalid drama. He stood up, walked over to the couch, and gently shook her awake. "Heather." She stirred, blinking in the dim light. "Mark, what is it?" "We need to talk," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. He turned his laptop around the forum thread, glowing in the dark room. "I was just reading about your crazy passenger." Her eyes scanned the screen. He watched as her face, soft with sleep, hardened into a mask of pure panic. She shot up her voice, a shrill whisper. "Where did you get that?" "Those are lies. They're trying to protect her because she's rich." "Are they?" Mark asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Are they lying about her name, Heather? Is her name not Serafina Hayes, the founder of Aura Gen?" He paused. "You didn't just push her, did you? You slapped her. And before you did, you used a racial slur. Didn't you?" The question hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from the room. Her silence was a confession. "Oh my God," he breathed, running a hand through his hair. He laughed, a short, ugly, humorless bark. "You didn't just lie to me, you made me a co-conspirator in your disgusting, racist little fairy tale. I defended you, I was ready to go to war for you. I was scared." She shrieked, tears of panic, not remorse, streaming down her face. "I knew you wouldn't understand." "Understand what? That your entire personality, this whole classy, elegant life you project, is so fragile that the sight of a black woman in work boots sends you into a violent rage. Is that what I'm supposed to understand? The fight was catastrophic, tearing down the flimsy framework of their relationship to reveal the rotten studs beneath. He accused her of being a shallow, prejudiced fraud. She accused him of only loving the idea of her, the perks of her job. They were both right. "I can't do this," he said, finally. The anger replaced by a vast, cold emptiness. He walked to the bedroom and threw some clothes into a duffel bag. "I can't be with someone like you. The person you pretended to be. I liked her. The person you actually are. She horrifies me." "Mark, wait," she pleaded, following him to the door. "Where will I go? The rent is due next week." "That's your problem now," he said, not looking back. "The fantasy is over." The click of the door shutting behind him was the sound of the last pillar of her life collapsing. The next morning, she woke to the incessant buzzing of her phone. Dazed, she opened Instagram, her sanctuary of curated perfection. It had become a war zone. Someone had found her profile and linked it in the forums. Hundreds of notifications flooded her screen. Her beautiful photos of sunsets from a cockpit of champagne in a jet cabin were now plastered with comments. "Is this the flight attendant who assaults billionaires? And calm a guess, judging books by their cover doesn't always work out, you racist clown. From a G650 to the unemployment line. You love to see it." Each comment was a digital stone cast at her. Her shrine had become her pillory. Shaking her fingers, fumbling, she navigated to her settings. A pop-up appeared. "Are you sure you want to permanently delete your account?" She stared at the pictures, a ghost of a life that was no longer hers. With a final shuddering breath, she tapped, "Confirm." And just like that, the beautiful, glamorous Heather Vance she had spent years building ceased to exist, vanishing into the digital ether. She was alone in an empty apartment with no job, no fiancé, and no identity. The house of cards had fallen. In the serene, minimalist confines of her Manhattan penthouse, an unnatural quiet reigned. Below, the city buzzed with its ceaseless energy, but here, high above the noise, the air was still. The faint scent of rain-washed concrete and blooming rooftop gardenias drifted through the open terrace doors. Days had passed since the incident. The red mark on Serafina Hayes' cheek had faded to a ghostly yellow bruise before vanishing entirely. But the memory of the insult, its raw, unthinking prejudice had settled deep within her, not as a wound, but as a problem to be solved. She was not celebrating. There was no sense of victory, only a cold, clear-eyed resolve. For Serafina, an engineer at her core, this was a system failure. Heather Vance was merely a faulty component, a symptom of a deeper, more corrosive flaw in the machine. Her legal team, led by the formidable Jessica Morgan, had assembled around a vast, reclaimed wood table in her living area. Jessica, a woman whose sharp suits and sharper intellect were legendary in New York, legal circles laid out their initial strategy with confident precision. It's an open and shut case for assault and battery against Ms. Vance. Jessica began, her voice crisp as she gestured to a series of documents on her tablet. "We have multiple witnesses, photographic evidence of the injury, and her own nonsensical admissions. We can ruin her. A civil judgment will allow us to garnish her wages for the rest of her life. It's clean, it's fast, and it sends a message. We make an example of her." The other lawyers nodded in agreement. It was the logical, straightforward path. But Serafina remained silent, her gaze fixed on the skyline where the setting sun was painting the clouds in hues of orange and violet. She thought of all the times she'd been underestimated, spoken down to, or treated as an anomaly in university classrooms, in early investor meetings, even now in subtle ways in the boardrooms of her own empire. The slap wasn't a singular event. It was simply the most overt expression of a prejudice she had navigated her entire life. Heather Vance hadn't seen a person. She'd seen a stereotype that didn't fit her worldview, and she'd reacted with the brute force of her ignorance. Making an example of her feels small, Serafina said, finally turning her chair to face the team. Her voice was quiet, yet it commanded the full attention of the room. It would be like fixing a single loose screw on a machine that has a cracked chassis. The next screw will just come loose tomorrow. She looked directly at Jessica. I don't want to sue Heather Vance. A collective stunned silence fell. Jessica's perfectly sculpted eyebrow rose a fraction of an inch. Her mind, trained to think in terms of defendants and plaintiffs' torts and damages, was recalibrating. Sarah, she assaulted you, Jessica pressed gently. There has to be a personal consequence. Her life is already a consequence, Serafina countered, her voice devoid of malice. She lost her job, her fiancé, the fantasy life she built for herself. She is adrift. Punishing her further serves no purpose. It's punching down. My fight is not with a disgraced flight attendant. Her gaze hardened with purpose. My fight is with the company that saw no issue with her being the face of their brand. My fight is with the culture that told her an action like that was in any way acceptable. She leaned forward, her hands flat on the cool wood of the table. I want to sue Stratus Jet Charter. We're not filing for assault. We're filing a suit based on negligent hiring, inadequate training, and fostering a corporate culture that enables and tacitly encourages racial discrimination. We're going after the system, not just the soldier. This was the twist. The unconventional, brilliant, and devastatingly effective strategy. This wasn't personal revenge. It was a strategic strike aimed at the heart of the problem. It transformed the narrative from a simple assault case into a landmark battle over corporate responsibility. Jessica Morgan's professional caution melted away, replaced by the fierce glint of a litigator who has just been handed the case of a lifetime. They'll fight it tooth and nail, she warned, though a smile played on her lips. They'll claim she was a rogue employee, an aberration. Let them, Serafina said simply. She turned to her ever-present chief of staff. Liam, tell them what you found. Liam, who had been silent until now, touched his tablet. A high-definition image of Heather's direct supervisor, David Finch, appeared on the large screen mounted on the wall. Stratusjet will claim Vance was a lone actor. We will prove she was a protected one. Liam began, his voice the epitome of calm efficiency. He swiped the screen. A new photo appeared, Finch at a company party, his arm around Heather Vance's waist. They have a documented, personal relationship that goes beyond professional. He was her direct supervisor and her regular social companion. He was the one who personally dismissed 2 prior formal complaints lodged against her for abrasive and biased behavior. Another swipe. The screen now showed a screenshot of the Stratus Jet Diversity and Inclusion training module. It was a dated, generic presentation of stock photos and platitudes. This is their entire mandated training, Liam explained. It has not been updated since 2012. Our forensic analysis of their server logs shows that over a third of their active flight crew never completed it. And those who did spent an average of 87 seconds on the module. There was no oversight. He saved the most damning evidence for last. A series of complex charts and graphs filled the screen. Finally, their hiring data. For client-facing roles, pilots and flight attendants, over the past 7 years, 92% of hires have been Caucasian. Candidates of color with equal or superior qualifications were passed over at a statistically indefensible rate. It's not a rogue employee, Jessica. It's a systemic, calculated, and protected pattern of behavior. The lawsuit was filed the following week. It was a 150-page legal torpedo naming not just the corporation, but CEO Robert Sterling and supervisor David Finch for gross negligence. The news exploded. Bloomberg, Reuters, The Wall Street Journal. Every major financial news outlet ran the story. Stratusjet's stock didn't just dip, it nosedived off a cliff. The discovery process was a bloodbath. Serafina's lawyers, funded by Auragen's near-limitless resources, deposed employee after employee, uncovering a rot that went straight to the core. David Finch was fired. The board of directors forced a humiliated Robert Sterling to issue a public apology that sounded more like a plea for mercy. And Heather Vance, the catalyst for it all, was summoned for a deposition. She entered the sterile conference room, looking small and worn, a ghost of her former self. She expected to be torn apart, to be forced to relive the slap over and over. But Serafina's lawyers barely asked about it. Their questions were cold, clinical, and aimed far above her head. Ms. Vance, a junior lawyer, began, "Can you describe for us the anti-bias training you received from Stratusjet upon being hired?" "I think it was a video," she mumbled. "And what were the key takeaways from this video? I don't remember." "Ms. Vance, were you ever required to attend in-person seminars regarding client relations and cultural sensitivity?" "No." The questions went on for hours, chipping away not at her, but at the corporate armor of Stratusjet. With every fumbled answer, she hammered another nail into her former employer's coffin. It was then, under the humming fluorescent lights, that the final, most brutal karma settled upon her. She was no longer the villain of the story. She wasn't even a supporting character. She was just Exhibit A, a footnote in a case about corporate malfeasance. Her great dramatic, life-altering mistake had rendered her utterly insignificant. The end came not with a dramatic courtroom verdict, but with a quiet, unconditional surrender. Faced with a mountain of damning evidence and hemorrhaging clients, Stratusjet Charter settled. The terms were brutal. The financial settlement was one of the largest on record for a corporate negligence case, a 9-figure sum that made headlines. But that wasn't the real victory for Serafina Hayes. The heart of the settlement was the mandate for change. Stratusjet was forced to fire its entire executive HR team and bring in a diversity, equity, and inclusion firm hand-picked by Serafina. Their hiring and training protocols were to be rebuilt from the ground up with transparent oversight and accountability. And then Serafina delivered her final masterful checkmate. In a press release, she announced that every single dollar of the settlement would be put into a new foundation, the Phoenix Initiative. Its mission to provide scholarships and grants for underprivileged women and people of color seeking careers in aviation engineering and technology. She had taken the ugliness of one moment and transformed it into a legacy of opportunity for thousands. As for Heather, her fall was complete and absolute. Her name was unsearchable for any job in the luxury service industry. Her fiancé was gone, her glamorous life an illusion. The last anyone heard, she was working as a cashier at a discount department store in a town she'd never heard of, her face anonymous in a sea of mediocrity. One evening, a news report on the store's small television showed Serafina Hayes dressed in a simple, elegant suit this time announcing the first round of Phoenix Initiative scholarships. Heather watched her face impassive, finally understanding the true nature of the power she had confronted. It wasn't the power of money, but the power of character. Serafina's story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't in status or appearance, but in integrity and purpose. It shows us how quickly a life built on prejudice can crumble, and how one person's stand for respect can create waves of positive change. If you were moved by this story of justice and hard karma, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribing to our channel for more incredible true-life stories. What did you think of Serafina's ultimate move? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one. Thank you for listening.